The office was empty, stripped of everything that had once made it mine. The sleek desks, the hum of productivity, the large screen displaying our company's achievements, all gone. The last remnants of my empire had been packed away, leaving nothing but the ghost of what had been. I stood by the window, staring out at the city I had once ruled in my own way. The skyline stretched endlessly, glittering with opportunity, mocking me with its unwavering permanence. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. Madeline Carter, CEO no more. Behind me, a slow, deliberate clap echoed through the vacant space. "Bravo," came a voice laced with amusement. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Isabel. My sister. My rival. She leaned against the doorway, her grin dripping with triumph, her sharp eyes drinking in the sight of my downfall like a connoisseur savoring fine wine. The younger of the two of us, but always the more ruthless, the more willing to destroy what she could not control. "Oh, poor little sister," Isabel taunted, her voice lilting with mock sympathy. "You never had what it takes to run a company." I let the words land, absorbing them, but showing nothing. Years of boardroom battles had taught me the value of control. Reacting to her would give her what she wanted. And I refused to hand her even a sliver of satisfaction. Instead, I turned slowly, meeting her gaze with cool detachment. "Enjoying yourself?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Isabel's smirk deepened as she stepped into the room, running a hand along the empty desk that had once been mine. "Oh, immensely. You have no idea how long I've waited for this moment." She tapped her manicured fingers against the surface, then let out a dramatic sigh. "You built something impressive, Maddie, I'll give you that. But you made it far too easy for me to take apart." I knew the truth of her words, but I refused to acknowledge it. Isabel had dismantled my business piece by piece, executing her sabotage with precision. She had poached my best developers, lured them away with false promises and higher salaries. She had undercut my contracts, spreading rumors that I couldn't meet deadlines, that I was losing control. Investors, once loyal to me, had pulled out, convinced by her whispers, her manipulations. And now here I was. But if Isabel expected me to break, she would be sorely disappointed. I folded my arms, tilting my head slightly. "And was it worth it?" I asked. "All the scheming? The backstabbing? Do you feel powerful now?" She let out a light laugh. "Powerful? No, Madeline. I feel unstoppable." She walked to the center of the room, surveying the emptiness like a queen inspecting her conquered lands. "You were always too sentimental," she continued. "You thought business was about loyalty, about fairness. But the truth is, it's about knowing when to cut throats before someone cuts yours." I let silence settle between us, let her believe she had won. Let her bask in her illusion of control. Because that was all it was, an illusion. Isabel had won this battle, yes. She had taken my company, my work, my reputation. But she had forgotten something crucial. This wasn't over. I turned back to the window, my voice as even as ever. "I suppose I should thank you." That made her pause. "Thank me?" I glanced at her, letting the corner of my mouth lift just slightly. "For teaching me an important lesson." She raised an eyebrow, suspicion flickering in her eyes. I turned fully, walking toward her, closing the space between us. "You've spent so much time trying to destroy me, Isabel. But you never stopped to think about what happens after." She frowned, but I didn't wait for her response. Instead, I stepped past her, heading for the door. I paused just long enough to glance back. "I'll see you soon, Isabel." And then I walked out, leaving her alone in the ruins of what she thought was her victory. Because while she had spent her time tearing me down, I had been playing the long game. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Isabel stood before me, practically glowing with victory, her grin as sharp as the dagger she had driven into my back. She held the stack of documents aloft, waving them like a trophy, her manicured fingers tightening around the edges of my so-called defeat. I watched her, my expression neutral, my pulse steady. I had learned long ago never to show weakness in front of her. "Well?" she prompted, her voice dripping with mock impatience. "Are you going to sign, or should I start clearing out the rest of your things for you?" She had spent months dismantling my company, eroding its foundation with methodical precision. First, she had stolen my top developers, luring them away with exaggerated promises and inflated salaries. Then, she had gone after my investors, whispering half-truths into their ears until they lost faith in me. She had undercut my contracts, spread rumors about my leadership, and when the damage was finally complete, she had swept in to collect the remains. And now, she wanted the final nail in the coffin. She wanted my signature, my consent, so she could take it all. I reached for the pen with a steady hand. "Oh, Madeline," Isabel cooed, tilting her head in mock sympathy. "You always did overestimate yourself. You never had the instinct for business. You never had the ruthlessness." I met her gaze, my fingers curling around the pen, pressing it against the crisp white paper. She had no idea. I signed my name with deliberate care, ensuring each stroke of ink was smooth, controlled. The moment the last letter was in place, I set the pen down, sliding the papers toward her. "There," I said coolly. "It's done." Isabel snatched the documents, her eyes flicking across the words, as if savoring the finality of it. "Smart choice," she murmured, tucking the papers into her leather folder. "You saved yourself the embarrassment of a dragged-out fight. Though, honestly, I would have enjoyed watching you struggle a little longer." I let out a slow breath, giving her nothing. She had always been this way, enjoying the power of pulling strings, of watching people squirm under her control. She had spent years trying to prove she was superior, that she was the true heir to our father's business legacy. She thought she had finally won. She was wrong. "Enjoy your victory," I told her evenly. "While it lasts." Isabel scoffed, her laughter sharp and dismissive. "Oh, Madeline. Always so dramatic. But at least now you're being realistic." She turned, striding toward the door, her heels clicking against the polished floor with smug certainty. I watched her go, my expression unreadable. Then, I pulled out my phone, my fingers gliding over the screen as I composed a single message. She signed. "Initiate the transfer." I hit send. Because while Isabel had been busy playing her game of destruction, I had been crafting my own strategy. And she had just played right into it. Hours later, as I sat in my now nearly empty office, I allowed myself a moment to reflect. This building had been my empire, my creation. I had built it from nothing, shaping it with my own hands, forging a company that had once stood tall against the best in the industry. And now it was gone. Taken. But that didn't mean I had lost. Because Isabel had missed something crucial. Our father had always been a meticulous man, especially when it came to legalities. When he passed, he left behind not just a company, but a set of ironclad conditions, ones Isabel had conveniently ignored in her pursuit of power. She thought she had won by forcing me out. But in reality, by doing so, she had triggered the very clause that would hand me everything. According to our father's will, if one sibling forced the other out of the company, their shares would automatically transfer to the removed party, under one condition: the departing sibling had to sign the agreement willingly. And I had. Isabel had believed she was acquiring my assets, my contracts, my legacy. But what she had actually signed away was control. By tomorrow morning, she would wake up to find that her so-called empire was no longer hers. I glanced at my phone as a new message popped up from my lawyer. "Transfer in motion. She'll know soon." I allowed myself the smallest, most fleeting smile. Let her bask in her victory for just a little while longer. By the time she realized what she had done, it would be far too late. The cool evening air brushed against my face as I stepped out of the building for the last time, or at least, that's what Isabel believed. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step measured, my pace steady. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. The trap had been set, and now all I had to do was watch it unfold. As I reached the curb, my phone vibrated in my hand. A message flashed across the screen. She signed. "Initiate the transfer." I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to let the weight of it settle in. The move had been months in the making, the pieces laid with careful precision. Isabel had thought she was playing me, thought she was stripping me of everything I had built, everything I had worked for. But in her arrogance, she had overlooked the most critical detail. I tucked my phone away, my lips pressing together in quiet satisfaction. She had no idea what she had just done. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and the tinted window slid down smoothly. Inside, my lawyer, Daniel Weston, sat waiting, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. "Madeline," he greeted as I slid into the passenger seat. "It's done." The door shut with a soft click, sealing us away from the world outside. "Tell me everything," I said. Daniel pulled a tablet from his briefcase, tapping the screen a few times before turning it toward me. A series of documents appeared: legal agreements, stock transfer records, official filings. "She never checked the fine print," he said, unable to keep the amusement out of his voice. "You gave her exactly what she wanted, a clean, undisputed signature. But she didn't realize the parent company bylaws overrule individual subsidiary agreements." I glanced at the screen, my eyes scanning the legal jargon that had become second nature to me over the years. It was all there, exactly as I had planned. "She thought she was taking my company," I murmured. "Instead, she handed me hers." Daniel nodded. "By forcing you out, she violated the key clause in your father's will. As of this moment, you're the majority shareholder of the parent company. By morning, it will be official." I exhaled slowly, the magnitude of it settling in. For years, Isabel had fought to prove she was the better businesswoman, the true heir to our father's empire. She had schemed, manipulated, and burned every bridge in her path. And now, she was about to learn that winning a battle didn't mean winning the war. "She's going to explode," I mused. Daniel smirked. "That's an understatement." I leaned back in the seat, closing my eyes for a brief moment. Tomorrow, the world would shift. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, I arrived at the corporate headquarters earlier than usual. The building, once a place I had ruled with confidence, now felt foreign, tainted by Isabel's influence. But not for much longer. I stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. The smooth hum of the machinery filled the silence as I ascended, each passing second bringing me closer to the inevitable confrontation. When the door slid open, the atmosphere was already different. The air was thick with tension, the usual morning chatter replaced by hushed whispers. Employees glanced at me, then quickly looked away, as if unsure of where their loyalty should lie. I strode down the hallway, my posture unwavering, my eyes locked ahead. The boardroom doors were already open when I reached them. Inside, Isabel sat at the head of the long, polished table, her fingers drumming impatiently against the surface. The board members were gathered, their expressions ranging from confusion to concern. Papers were scattered across the table, their contents no doubt detailing the very thing that had shattered Isabel's world this morning. As I entered, she looked up. And for the first time in a long time, there was no smugness in her eyes. Only fury. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, slamming her hand against the table. The force sent one of the documents fluttering to the floor. I walked to the opposite end of the table, pulling out a chair with deliberate ease. "Good morning, Isabel." Her hands clenched into fists. "Don't play games with me, Madeline." She shoved a stack of papers toward me. This nonsense? What the hell did you do?" I picked up the documents, skimming them with a casual glance. "Oh," I said lightly. "It looks like the ownership records have been updated." I met her gaze, letting my words sink in. "It seems you no longer own the company." Her chair scraped loudly against the floor as she stood. "That's impossible." One of the board members, a man in his 60s with sharp gray eyes, cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the filings, Ms. Carter. The transfer is legitimate." He hesitated before adding, "By forcing Madeline out, you triggered the redistribution clause in your father's will." Isabel's face paled. "That clause was never enforced before." "Because no one has ever violated it before," I replied smoothly. She shook her head, her chest rising and falling rapidly. No, this is wrong. This can't be happening." But it was. The documents didn't lie. The law didn't lie. And for once, neither did fate. She turned on me, her eyes blazing. "You planned this." I tilted my head. I prepared for this. Her breath hitched, and for the briefest moment, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Not just rage. Panic. This isn't over, she spat. I leaned forward, folding my hands atop the table. Oh, Isabel, I murmured. It was over the moment you underestimated me. Her fingers twitched at her sides, as if itching to throw something, to destroy something. But she couldn't. Not anymore. The board members shifted uncomfortably, eager to distance themselves from the mess she had created. One of them cleared his throat. I believe we need to proceed with the vote. Isabel's head snapped toward them. What vote? The gray-eyed man adjusted his glasses. The vote of no confidence. The final blow. Her lips parted slightly, as if struggling to form words. No, she breathed. You can't. But they could. And they would. Because no one wanted to be aligned with a leader who had just lost everything. One by one, the board members raised their hands. And just like that, Isabel was out. Security arrived minutes later. She screamed, she threatened, but none of it mattered. As they escorted her out, she turned to me one last time, her voice low and venomous. You think this is a victory? She hissed. You think you've won? I met her gaze, my expression unreadable. And then, just as she was about to be dragged through the doors, I said softly, I don't think I've won, Isabel. I smiled. I know I have. And with that, she was gone. The morning sunlight slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long, golden streaks across the boardroom table. It was the same room where countless deals had been made, where decisions had shaped the future of our father's company. Today, it was the stage for something far more personal. Isabel was already seated when I arrived, a smirk curling at the edges of her lips as if she had won before the meeting even began. She sat at the head of the table, my former seat, the place I had occupied for years before she had ripped it away from me. But she didn't know. Not yet. The board members were gathered, some flipping through their notes, others exchanging uneasy glances. There was a charge in the air, a tension thick enough to be sliced through. They had heard the rumors, the whispers trickling down from legal teams, but they hadn't seen the proof yet. They hadn't seen the documents that would shift everything. I walked in, my steps steady, my face unreadable. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. Every movement was controlled, deliberate. Isabel's smirk widened as I approached. Well, she purred, leaning back in her chair. You look remarkably calm for someone about to be publicly humiliated. I pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down without a word. Isabel tilted her head, amused by my silence. Oh, come on, Maddie. Say something. I want to hear your final words before I erase whatever remains of your pathetic legacy. I folded my hands on the table and met her gaze evenly. Before we begin, I said, my voice smooth, we need to address some ownership changes. The moment the words left my lips, I saw it, the slightest flicker of uncertainty in Isabel's eyes. She let out a short laugh. Ownership changes, she repeated. Madeline, sweetie, you don't own anything anymore. That's what today is about. The board members shifted in their seats, murmuring to one another. I reached into my bag and pulled out a neatly bound stack of documents. I slid them across the table, letting the weight of them land with a satisfying thud. Read them, I said simply. Isabel frowned, her fingers hovering over the papers before finally snatching them up. Her eyes flicked across the first page. Then the second. Her grip tightened. I watched the color drain from her face. No, she breathed. She flipped through the pages faster, scanning the clauses, the legal signatures, the finalization stamps. Her throat worked as she swallowed hard. No, this isn't right. They're correct, I said, my voice calm, measured. As of this morning, I own 60% of the company. Her eyes snapped up, wide with disbelief. That's impossible, she spat. Across the table, one of the senior board members cleared his throat. We've had our legal teams verify everything. The filings are legitimate, Miss Carter. He adjusted his glasses, his sharp gaze flicking toward Isabel. By forcing your sister out of the company, you triggered the redistribution clause in your father's will. Isabel's breath hitched. That clause was never supposed to be enforced. I arched a brow, but it was. Her fingers curled into fists around the papers. "You tricked me," she whispered, her voice shaking. I leaned forward, resting my elbows lightly on the table. "I gave you exactly what you wanted, Isabel. You were so desperate to have me sign away my rights that you never stopped to check the details. You were too busy gloating to realize you weren't taking my company." My lips curved ever so slightly. "You were handing me yours." A deadly silence filled the room. The board members, once reluctant to pick sides, now saw the tide shifting. Their gazes flicked between Isabel and me, weighing their options, calculating where their loyalty should lie. And I already knew the answer. Isabel's mouth opened and closed, her mind racing, trying to grasp at any possible way to undo this. Then the anger came. "You planned this," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. I tilted my head slightly. "I prepared for it." She shoved back her chair, rising so fast it nearly toppled over. "This is ridiculous. I built this company." No, I interrupted, my voice as sharp as a blade. I stood slowly, meeting her glare head-on. "I built this company, and you tore it apart, thinking you could rebuild it in your own image. But all you did was burn down what you couldn't control." The room was deathly quiet. And then, from the far end of the table, came the final blow. "We need to put this to a vote," the gray-haired board member announced, folding his hands neatly in front of him. Effective immediately, I motioned for a vote of no confidence in Isabel Carter as CEO. Isabel's eyes widened in panic. "You can't do that." "It has already begun," he said simply. One by one, hands rose around the table. A silent execution. Isabel's chest rose and fell rapidly as the realization hit her. Her face twisted in disbelief, then fury, then something that almost resembled fear. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. No. This isn't happening." But it was. "Security," the board member called out. The doors opened, and 2 security officers stepped inside. "No," Isabel snapped, her voice frantic now. She turned toward me, desperation flickering in her eyes. "Madeline, you can't do this. I made a mistake, okay? But we're sisters. You wouldn't." I met her gaze one last time, and for the first time in my life, I saw her for what she truly was. Not the invincible force she had always pretended to be. Not the unshakable woman who had crushed everything in her path. Just a person. A desperate, scrambling person who had finally lost. I let out a slow breath, then spoke the words that sealed it. "You did this to yourself, Isabel." Her lips parted, as if she had something more to say. But there was nothing left. The guards flanked her, gripping her arms. She struggled for a moment, but it was useless. As they led her away, she threw one last look over her shoulder. "You think this is over?" she shouted. "You think this is a victory?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because I had already won. The boardroom was silent, thick with the weight of what had just transpired. The only sound was the distant echo of Isabel's angry footsteps as security escorted her out of the building, her final words still hanging in the air like a threat. "You think this is over? You think this is a victory?" I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The tension that had coiled around me like a vice for months finally began to unravel. Around the table, the board members exchanged cautious glances. They had witnessed the shift of power, the stunning reversal that had turned Isabel's triumphant takeover into a catastrophic defeat. And now, they were recalibrating, assessing where their alliances should lie. The gray-haired board member cleared his throat. "Now that the matter has been settled, we should proceed to the next step." He glanced at the others. "I believe we need to confirm the new CEO." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. One of the younger members, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, leaned forward. "Madeline, you now hold 60% of the company's shares. That makes you the de facto leader. But do you intend to formally take the position?" I knew what they wanted. Stability. Assurance. They had backed Isabel when they believed she would be their strongest asset, and now they were looking to me to restore order. I took my time, allowing the weight of the moment to settle before answering. Yes, I said finally, my voice steady. I will be assuming the role of CEO. Another ripple of murmured agreement followed. The formalities were necessary, but the truth was, the decision had already been made the moment Isabel fell. The gray-haired board member straightened. Then let's take it to a vote. It was purely symbolic at this point, but I allowed it. One by one, hands were raised around the table. This time, there was no hesitation. Unanimous. The chair was mine again. And this time, no one would take it from me. After the meeting, I made my way to my new office, the one that had once belonged to Isabel. It felt strange stepping into a space that had been tainted by her presence, but it also felt like reclamation. She had taken my company, my position, and for a brief moment, she had believed she had taken my future. But now, everything was back in its rightful place. Daniel, my lawyer, was already waiting for me inside. He stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the city below with a small, knowing smile. Well, he said as I closed the door behind me. That was satisfying to watch. I let out a breath, shaking my head as I walked toward the desk. It's done. Mostly. He turned to face me. You still have the matter of cleaning up the mess she left behind. The company isn't in the best shape. Investors are rattled, and the internal teams are split between those who backed Isabel and those who were waiting for her to fail. I nodded. I had already considered all of it. Isabel hadn't just tried to destroy me, she had nearly destroyed the company in the process. Her aggressive tactics, her reckless decision-making, and her obsession with power had left cracks in the foundation. I'll fix it, I said simply. Daniel chuckled. Of course you will. He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick folder, setting it on the desk. These are the immediate issues that need your attention. Employee retention, damaged investor relations, and, he smirked slightly, the various lawsuits Isabel was juggling before she got herself thrown out. I sighed, flipping open the folder. It was worse than I had expected. Isabel had been playing fast and loose with the company's resources, making deals that benefited her personally rather than the business. Undoing the damage would take time. But I wasn't afraid of hard work. I reached for a pen, ready to dive in. But before I could start, my phone buzzed. A new email. I glanced at the screen. From Isabel Carter. Subject, you won. For now. I hesitated for only a moment before opening it. The message was short. You won. Enjoy it while it lasts. I stared at the words, feeling a strange mix of emotions. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what she had done, just a warning. A bitter promise that this wasn't the end. Daniel leaned over, catching a glimpse of the email. She's not giving up, is she? No, I murmured. She never does. He shook his head. She's out, Madeline. There's nothing she can do. I wasn't so sure. Because Isabel had never been one to accept defeat. The following weeks were a whirlwind of recovery and rebuilding. I spent long hours restructuring the leadership teams, reassuring investors, and repairing the damage Isabel had inflicted. There were difficult conversations, tense negotiations, and moments where it felt like I was balancing on a knife's edge. But I was winning. The company was stabilizing. The stock was climbing again. The people who had doubted me before were beginning to see the truth. Real leadership wasn't about tearing others down. It was about building something lasting. Then, one afternoon, another email arrived. This one was different. From Isabel Carter. Subject, need any advisors? I blinked at the screen, reading the message twice. She wasn't asking for a job. She wasn't offering peace. But it was some small, bitter acknowledgement that she wasn't ready to disappear completely. I considered my response carefully before forwarding her the company's latest proposal, a collaboration initiative, something she had never valued. A few hours later, the weeks following Isabel's downfall were a blur of long days and even longer nights. The company, my company, was stabilizing, but it was far from the empire I had built before she tore it apart. Every time I stepped into my office, I was reminded of the damage she had done. Departments were fractured, some employees still loyal to her despite everything. Investors were cautious, still reeling from the chaos her leadership had caused. And the media? They fed on the drama, turning the Carter sisters into the corporate world's favorite scandal. But I wasn't here to dwell on the past. I was here to build the future. My first order of business was unveiling the company's true potential, something Isabel had never cared about. Security. While she had been busy undercutting contracts and playing mind games, I had been developing something real, an innovative, next-generation security system that could revolutionize data protection for businesses worldwide. And now it was time to bring it into the light. The conference room was packed. Board members, department heads, and key investors all sat around the table, waiting to see what would come next. I stood at the front of the room, my hands resting lightly on the edge of the sleek podium. The massive screen behind me displayed a simple, striking image, a new era of security. As many of you know, I began, my voice steady. Our company has been through a period of instability. Decisions were made that put our foundation at risk. Trust was broken. But today we're turning a new page. I took a breath, letting my words settle. What I'm about to show you isn't just a product, it's a vision for the future. I pressed a button on the small remote in my hand, and the screen shifted. A sleek interface appeared, showcasing the layers of security protocols my team and I had spent years refining. This system, Sentinel, is designed to be an impenetrable defense against data breaches, corporate espionage, and cyber threats. It's faster, smarter, and more adaptive than anything currently on the market. And best of all, it integrates seamlessly with existing infrastructures, eliminating the need for costly overhauls. The room was silent, everyone watching with rapt attention. I continued, we have already conducted preliminary testing, and the results speak for themselves. This is the future of corporate security. A few investors exchanged glances. Some were intrigued, others skeptical. Then the questions came. How does it compare to current market leaders? One of the board members asked. Better, I answered without hesitation. Our algorithms are designed to evolve, learning from patterns in real time. Unlike traditional security systems, which require constant manual updates, Sentinel stays ahead of potential threats before they happen. Another investor leaned forward. And how soon can we take it to market? I allowed myself a small smile. With the right backing, within the next quarter. The murmur that swept through the room told me everything I needed to know. They were interested. More than that, they saw the potential. The next few days were a whirlwind of negotiations, fine-tuning contracts, and securing funding for Sentinel's official launch. Investors who had been wary after Isabel's leadership were now eager to align themselves with something tangible, something game-changing. The stock, which had taken a hit under her rule, began to climb again. Analysts speculated that the company was on the verge of something big. And then, just as things were moving forward, Isabel tried one last move. It came in the form of a legal notice. I was sitting in my office, reviewing a final investor agreement when Daniel walked in, his expression unreadable. "You're not going to like this," he said, placing a folder on my desk. I flipped it open, scanning the top page. My stomach tightened. Petition for review of will validity. I exhaled slowly, setting the paper down. She's challenging the will? Daniel nodded. She's claiming your father was mentally unfit when he included the redistribution clause. A hollow laugh escaped me. That's ridiculous. He was completely in control of his faculties. She's arguing that his medical records prove otherwise. I stared at him. His medical records? Daniel sighed. She's trying to use his final months against you, claiming that he was suffering cognitive decline, which means the redistribution clause should be invalid. I clenched my jaw. She's desperate. She is, Daniel agreed. But if this gains traction, it could slow things down, damage investor confidence. I leaned back, pressing my fingers to my temple. Isabel had always been ruthless, but this was low, even for her. For a brief moment, exhaustion settled over me. I had already won. I had already beaten her. But she couldn't let it go. She would rather burn everything down than see me succeed. I straightened. Then we fight. Daniel smiled slightly. I thought you'd say that. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another folder, which is why I already prepared a counterattack. I took the folder and opened it. Inside was something I hadn't expected. A video. I glanced at Daniel. "What is this?" He gestured for me to play it. I tapped the screen, and my father's face appeared. The recording was from his final months. His voice was steady, his gaze sharp as he looked into the camera. "If you're watching this," he said, "then one of my daughters has decided to challenge my wishes." He exhaled, shaking his head. I anticipated this, which is why I want to make something very clear. He leaned forward. I was fully aware of what I was doing when I put that clause in place. I knew exactly what I wanted. If either of you tries to remove the other from this company, then the shares will be redistributed accordingly. No loopholes. No negotiations. This is final. He paused, his expression hardening. "Isabel, if this is you challenging the will, stop. You can't win. And the more you fight, the more you prove why I made this decision in the first place." The video ended. Silence filled the room. I looked up at Daniel, something unreadable tightening in my chest. "When was this recorded?" I asked quietly. "A month before he passed." I swallowed. My father had known. He had seen this coming. And he had left me the exact weapon I needed. I exhaled slowly, then nodded. "File it. And this." Daniel grinned. "With pleasure." 2 days later, Isabel stormed out of the courtroom. Her case? Dismissed. The will? Upheld. And her reputation? Shattered. She didn't try to contact me. She didn't send another email. She simply disappeared. And for the first time in a long, long time, I finally felt something close to peace. It had been months since Isabel's final attempt to claw back control ended in complete failure. The legal battle she tried to ignite had burned out before it ever truly began. The courts had upheld my father's will, just as we had expected, and with that ruling, Isabel had been left with nothing. No company. No influence. No power. For weeks after the case was closed, I had expected her to make another move, to reappear in some dramatic way, to attempt one last desperate ploy to ruin me. But there was nothing. No press releases. No sudden scandals. Not even a whisper of her name in the business world. It was as if she had vanished. And for a while, I was content to let it stay that way. Until I received her email. It came through late at night, the subject line simple. "You won. Enjoy it while it lasts." I stared at the screen, rereading the words, searching for something beneath them. A hidden meaning, an unspoken threat. But there was nothing more. Just that one bitter acknowledgement. Daniel had been right when he said she wasn't the type to give up. But this? This wasn't her style. Isabel didn't just walk away. She didn't retreat into the shadows. She didn't let things end without a fight. Something was different. And for the first time since our war had begun, I wasn't sure if I wanted to know why. Weeks passed, and I buried myself in work. Sentinel had launched successfully, bringing in record-breaking contracts. Investors who had once been hesitant were now fighting to be part of the next big thing. The company had not only stabilized, it was thriving. But despite all of it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unfinished. Isabel hadn't been seen publicly since the court ruling. No interviews, no new business ventures. Just complete silence. And then, another email arrived. This one was different. From Isabel Carter. Subject: Need any advisors? I froze as I read the words. For a moment, I thought I had misread it. But no, she had actually written it. I read it again. And again. Was this some kind of joke? Some final game? I hesitated for a long time before forwarding her the company's latest proposal, a collaboration initiative, something she had never valued. A few hours later, she responded. Interesting. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't surrender. But maybe, just maybe, it was the closest thing to peace Isabel Carter was capable of. The email sat in my inbox, waiting. I had read it at least a dozen times, parsing through the words, trying to understand the shift. Need any advisors? Coming from anyone else, it would have been a simple business proposition, a casual inquiry. But this was Isabel. My sister. My rival. The woman who had spent months, years, tearing me down, trying to ruin everything I had built. And now, she was offering, what? A truce? A role? A chance to return? I wasn't naive. Isabel didn't do things without a reason. If she was reaching out, it wasn't because she had suddenly changed. It wasn't because she had seen the error of her ways. It was because she had nothing left. Or, at least, that's what I told myself. Still, I forwarded her the collaboration initiative, the project she had scoffed at when she had been in power. It was something I had been working on quietly even before she had tried to destroy me, a long-term strategy focused on strategic partnerships rather than cutthroat competition. It was everything she had once dismissed. And now, she was interested. Interesting. That was all she said in reply. A single word, deliberately vague. And I wasn't sure what to do with it. For days, I said nothing. I let her email linger, unacknowledged. Meanwhile, the company continued to rise. Sentinel had exceeded even my highest expectations. The deals we had closed in the past quarter were stronger than anything the company had achieved before, and the shift in leadership had proven to be a turning point. I had won. In every measurable way, I had succeeded. And yet, there was a nagging feeling I couldn't shake. Victory should have felt more satisfying, more complete. Instead, there was this strange, empty space where the fight had been. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized the truth. The real battle had never been about the company. It had always been about us. Two sisters, locked in a war neither of us had started. Our father had built this company with the expectation that one of us would take over. He had shaped us, guided us, played us against each other in ways neither of us had truly understood until it was too late. For so long, I had blamed Isabel for everything, for her cruelty, her ambition, her willingness to destroy rather than create. And she had blamed me for being weak, for failing to play the game as ruthlessly as she did. But in the end, we had both been playing a game we hadn't designed. And now, for the first time, the game was over. I had won, but I wasn't sure what winning really meant anymore. 2 weeks passed before I finally replied to her email. Let's talk. No pleasantries. No pretense. Just that. An hour later, my phone rang. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Madeline, she said, her voice smooth as ever. I was beginning to think you weren't going to respond. I leaned back in my chair, gazing out the window at the skyline. I wasn't sure if I should. She let out a soft laugh. Fair. Silence stretched between us, long and heavy. Then, finally, she sighed. I don't expect you to trust me. That's good, I said. Because I don't. Another pause. She exhaled. I don't want to fight anymore. I almost laughed at that. You don't. No, she hesitated. And I don't expect you to believe that either. But it's the truth. I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. You won, she continued. And I, a breath, a swallow. I lost. That's just how it is. But it doesn't mean I have to disappear. It doesn't mean I have to be irrelevant. And you think working with me will change that? I think it's the only way it will, she admitted. I studied the city, the lights twinkling in the distance. Why now, Isabel? A long silence. Then, finally, she said, because I don't know who I am without this. I hadn't expected that. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Then, quietly, I said, neither do I. And that was the truth. For so long, my entire existence had been built around fighting her, proving I was better, proving I deserved this more. And now that the war was over, what came next? Neither of us had ever stopped to ask that question. Until now. We met in person a week later. Neutral ground. A quiet, high-end restaurant on the outskirts of the city. Somewhere neither of us had history. Somewhere we could talk without the weight of the past suffocating us. She arrived first, sitting by the window, dressed in sharp black as always. But there was something different about her now. A tiredness in her eyes. A heaviness in her shoulders. I slid into the seat across from her. She studied me for a long moment before speaking. You look good. So do you. A small smirk. Liar. I didn't argue. The waiter arrived, took our orders, and then we were alone again. So, she said, swirling her glass of water absent-mindedly. Where do we go from here? I considered that. What do you want, Isabel? She sighed, glancing away. I don't know yet. Then, quieter, but I know what I don't want. And that's to waste the rest of my life trying to destroy you. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. She eyed it warily. What is this? The collaboration proposal. A beat. Then, slowly, she opened it. She scanned the pages, her brows furrowing slightly as she absorbed the details. You're actually considering this? She murmured. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. She looked up at me, searching my face. Why? Because I knew her. Because despite everything, despite all the damage she had done, there was no one who understood this business the way she did. No one who understood me the way she did. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop fighting the past and start building something new. I held her gaze. Because we're stronger together than we ever were apart. She let out a breath, setting the folder down. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. All right, she said. Let's see where this goes. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a promise. But it was something. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough.